Hello everyone and welcome back to another Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is our 127th deck and it's titled Time for Bill, Pony of Bree to show his worth. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we are doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. Really quickly, I do want to apologize if you hear any echoes. I'm trying a different recording setup, so please let me know if this is better or worse than what I normally do. I would love to get the feedback. But with that out of the way, let's move into our random card of the week. And this time it was suggested to us by Doodle over on Discord/Patreon. And our random card this week is going to be Bill the Pony. So Bill the Pony is 3 and a white for a 1/4 legendary creature horse. When Bill the Pony enters the battlefield, create 2 food tokens and sacrifice a food. Until the end of turn, target creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. So, as you probably already know, based on both the title of the video, the image of the video, and of course the fact that this is our random card of the week, since we are building around a random legend, that does mean that Bill is also going to be our commander this week. Now, it is very important to realize that even though Bill is a 1 power 4 toughness creature, because of his ability to sacrifice a food, we can actually have Bill deal damage as 4 rather than as 1. So that leads us into a couple of unique strategies for this commander, which we'll get into in just a second. But I do want to very quickly shout out Bill the Pony for being obviously one of the best creatures in all of Magic the Gathering. I mean, look at him. He's great. He's beautiful. And also mention that if you are interested in this deck in particular, I have a very big attachment to this deck because this is one of the very few times that I've actually kept one of the decks that I put together for this channel. So I don't keep them together very often. However, I will probably ramble a little bit about how much I love this deck because I love it so much that I actually kept it together after the recording. So this is now officially in my personal rotation as well. And so I suppose, without any more further ado, let's check out some of our themes for Bill the Pony. So our first theme is going to be all about food. Since Bill the Pony makes 2 food when it enters the battlefield, but it needs us to sacrifice the foods in order to use his ability, we obviously want to have more than just 2 food tokens. So we have a ton of cards in the deck that actually produce food, things like East Farthing Farmer, which is 2 and a white for a 2/3 halfling peasant. When East Farthing Farmer enters the battlefield, create a food token. When you do, target creature you control gets +1/+1 until the end of turn for each food you control. So if we cast this right after casting Bill, we'd have 3 food in play. We would give probably Bill +3/+3, and then we could also use Bill's ability to do damage equal to its toughness, meaning we could just hit someone for 7 damage. Yeah, that might be on turn 5 technically, but that's okay, all things considered. It's still pretty solid for what we're trying to do. And of course, there's going to be a ton of food generation, so East Farthing Farmer could give Bill a massive boost in both power and toughness if we need it. Our second theme is to take our food and use that to use our other creature's toughness in combat. So Bill is a 1/4, and that's great. We love having that on our commander. But we also have a ton of other creatures in the deck that have a very large toughness. So for example, we have Indomitable Ancients, which is 2 white for a 2/10. That is it. It's just a 2/10. I know it's got a lot of words on it, but it is all flavor text. So despite the fact that this is the second most expensive card in the entire deck at a massive $6.07 for a 2/10 vanilla creature, in this deck it actually winds up acting more like a 10/10 creature for only 4 mana. So that can be incredibly powerful when we're attacking. We don't have to sacrifice the food until our opponents have declared blocks, whether they've decided to just take the damage or block with a creature. So they might think that they're blocking a 2/10 when in reality they're blocking a 10/10. So that is kind of one of the core tenets of our deck. We want to use Bill's ability to, well, use his ability to pump up our creature's toughness and then use that to hit our opponents. Now, On the other hand, we could just use Bill and try to go all the way with the pony damage. And that is what theme number 3 is all about, because this is kind of a secret Voltron commander. We want to suit Bill up with as many equipment as possible and just start chipping away at our opponents. And we can use things like Hot Soup, which is 1 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature can't be blocked. Whenever equipped creature is dealt damage, destroy it, equip for 3. We can use things like Hot Soup to be able to get Bill through anyone who might be able to block him, and if all of a sudden we're doing 4, maybe even more, which we'll talk about in just a minute, damage to our opponents every single turn, Bill the Pony can really close out the game very quickly and start really knocking people out with commander damage. So that is the core of our deck. We have food, we have really big toughness creatures, and we have a Voltron strategy built in as well. And trust me when I say no one is ever going to be able to live down getting taken out with Bill the Pony. No one sees it coming, no one sees Bill as a threat, but I guarantee you, once we start talking about some of our key cards, you'll probably see Bill as a threat. So with that being said, let's take a look at our first key card, and this one is Baldin Century Herdmaster. So this is one of the in-universe cards from the Street Fighter Secret Lair. I don't remember the specific card that it was. I want to say E Honda. I'm not big on Street Fighter, so if I'm wrong, please correct me. But Baldin is 4 white for a 0/7 human warrior, so already on theme, massive toughness. As long as it's your turn, each creature assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. Also great. That now means we don't have to spend the food to get Bill's ability. We can just hit someone for 4 right away. And whenever Baldin Century Headmaster attacks, up to 100 target creatures each get +0/+X until the end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand. Now, as weird as it is, it's not unlikely for this deck to have 7 cards in hand most of the game, because we do actually have a lot of ways to draw cards, even though we are in mono white. So there's a good chance that if we attack with Baldin and Bill could be getting +7/+0, or I'm sorry, other way around. I'm so used to thinking about it as power, +0/+7, meaning that Bill automatically becomes an 11 toughness creature, meaning he is just 2 hits away from knocking people out of the game. So Baldin is incredibly important, especially if we start to go a little bit wide with things like Indomitable Ancients, Baldin, Bill, East Farthing Farmer. We can really start to close out the game very quickly, especially if we have a ton of cards in our hand. And then our second key card is going to be the Battle of Bywater. So I mentioned last week I try not to put a lot of board wipes in key cards because that doesn't make a lot of sense, and yet here I am putting another board wipe into the key card section. But I'd like to think that this one is justified because the Battle of Bywater is 1 white for a sorcery, destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater, then create a food token for each creature you control. Almost none of the creatures in our deck have more than 3 power. And the ones that do, either we're okay with them going away or they have some way to protect themselves. So the Battle of Bywater actually winds up being pretty much just a one-sided board wipe. We can take care of anything our opponents have that's worth destroying, and then we get to make food tokens on top of it, meaning now we get to leave behind Baldin, we get to leave behind Bill, we get to just start smashing into our opponents for a ton of damage because we just removed all of their blockers and we made enough food tokens. That way, East Farthing Farmer is going to give a much bigger buff, Bill can continuously make things hit by its toughness, and it's going to just really win us the game. The Battle of Bywater, while it is a board wipe, really acts more like a finisher in this deck than anything else, so I do think it earns its spot here in the key cards. And then finally, that leads us to our last key card, which is Gilrain Dunedain Protector. And Gilrain is 2 and a white for a 2/3 legendary creature, human noble. Pay 2, tap, exile another target creature you control. You may return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If you don't, at the beginning of the next end step, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control with a vigilance counter and a lifelink counter on it. So Gilrain doesn't look like it does too much right up front, but it really is amazing how much this card does in terms of Bill the Pony and what we really want to be doing with our strategy. Because first off, being able to exile Bill and return him to play means that we get his enter the battlefield effect again. We get 2 more food tokens, which is incredibly important to what we're trying to do. And if we exile him and bring him back at the end step, we actually bring him back, get the food, and then also give him vigilance and lifelink for as long as he remains on the battlefield. And if we have a 1/4 with vigilance and lifelink that's doing damage equal to its toughness, so essentially acting as a 4/4, that can close out games very quickly because it's not only attacking, it's defending, it's gaining us life. And on top of all of that, as if that wasn't enough for Gilrain also acts as protection. Because if someone points a single targeted removal spell at Bill, say a Path to Exile, they're just trying to get rid of him, we can exile him, bring him back, and he's safe from that spell. Plus, if someone's trying to board wipe, just destroy all the creatures, we can still use Gilrain, exile Bill, bring him back at the end of turn so he survives the board wipe, and then we still get the vigilance, we still get the lifelink, we still have our commander. So Gilrain, even though she's not going to be super useful in combat, she is only a 2/3, so she would act as a 3/3. She is really, really important to the strategy of this deck and definitely earns a spot in our key cards. And if I had to pick like the number 1 MVP of the deck, that obviously is not Bill the Pony, because you can't beat Bill the Pony. He is the MVP, the most valuable pony. I rambled, but anyway, Gilrain would be the MVP if not for Bill the Pony. So with all of that being said, let's move on from our key cards into our cool interactions. These are the cards in the deck that synergize very well together, and while they may not necessarily win the game outright, they typically will put us in a winning position or generate enough value that it's hard for us to lose the game. And the first cool interaction that I want to talk about is between Aegis of the Heavens and Flaming Fist. So we've talked a little bit about our Voltron strategy, trying to get Bill to the point where we can knock people out in a couple of hits, but this combination literally lets us knock people out with 1 attack from Bill the Pony. And the way that it works is we're going to use Aegis of the Heavens, which is 1 and a white for an instant. Target creature gets +1/+7 until the end of turn. That, combined with Flaming Fist, which is 2 and a white for legendary enchantment background, whenever creatures you own have, whenever this creature attacks, it gains double strike until the end of turn. So essentially, we can attack with Bill. He's going to get double strike from Flaming Fist, meaning our opponents are thinking they might take 2 damage, maybe 8 if they don't block Bill and we use his ability to sacrifice a food. So they think, 8 damage, that's not too much. I'll let it through. We'll take 8 pony damage. And then we go, no. We cast Aegis of the Heavens, giving Bill +1/+7, putting his toughness to 11, meaning that when he hits with double strike damage, he does 22 damage right out, knocking someone out of the game with commander damage out of nowhere. So while this may not be the most fun way to lose a game, I would argue it's a pretty fun way to win a game. So Aegis of the Heavens, very good in this deck, really pumps up all of our Toughness Matters creatures, and Flaming Fist is phenomenal with Bill, because just going from attacking with a 1/4 to a technically 2/8 makes a big difference when we can do damage equal to their toughness. So that is cool interaction number 1. Cool interaction number 2 is going to look a little bit different. This one is between Rosy Cotton of South Lane and of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit. So it feels a little bit cheating to put 2 cards from technically the same set into a cool interaction, because, obviously they interact with each other. They were designed to be with each other. But Rosy Cotton of South Lane is again kind of an unspoken MVP of the deck. She is 2 and a white for a 1/1 halfling peasant. When Rosy Cotton of South Lane enters the battlefield, create a food token, and whenever you create a token, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control other than Rosy. So most of the time that counter is going to go on Bill. Maybe we don't have Bill in play, we have to put it somewhere else, that's okay too. But we really want to be putting it on Bill. And so Rosy is going to be partnered up with Of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit, which is a 3-mana saga, and when it comes in, we put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature, create a food token. At lore counter 2, draw a card, create a food token, and lore counter 3, create a 1/1 white halfling creature token for each food you control. So let's say the board is completely clear. We're going to cast Bill the Pony, Rosy Cotton, and of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit. So Bill, we'll say he comes in first just to make our lives easy. We have 2 food. Rosie comes in, we make a food, we've created a token, we put a counter on Bill. Of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit comes in, we put another counter on Bill, make a food, put another counter on Bill, draw a card, make a food, put a counter on Bill. Then at this point, we have 5 total food tokens. We're going to make 5 1/1 halflings and put 5 +1/+1 counters on a creature we control. That can get out of hand very, very quickly and really start to knock people out of the game, especially when you remember we're trying to give Bill double strike. We're trying to make Bill unblockable. We're trying to give ways to get evasion, and Bill can really take people out of the game very, very quickly. And again, both of these cards could be considered MVPs. Of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit has won me multiple games with this deck since I've played it, and it is a very powerful card, even though it doesn't look like it on the surface. But those are our cool interactions. So now we're going to get to probably the most interesting part of the deck tech, and that is the price. And this week, this is an ultra budget deck coming in at only $33.25. So as I've already mentioned, this deck has made its way into my own personal rotation, so at this point I've played quite a few games with it, and you would be surprised at just how efficient $33 is in Commander. Most of the time you think about how decks need to be very expensive, they have a lot of different value engines that are going off, they've got a lot of different cards that you need that are considered staples. Those still exist in our deck, but they're much cheaper than in most other decks, and it still functions just as well. And as weird as it is, looking at this $33 price tag, a lot of it boils down to just a couple of cards. We talked about Indomitable Ancients being $6, but our most expensive deck is actually Academy Manufacturer, which is a massive $7.86. That is a huge portion of our total overall budget, but I will argue it is definitely worth the include if you have one, because Academy Manufacturer is 3 mana for a 1/3 artifact creature assembly worker. If you would create a clue, food, or treasure token, instead create one of each. So in this case, we're making a ton of food. We have some ways in the deck to create clues and a couple of ways to make treasure, but it's almost entirely food. So if we cast Bill the Pony with Academy Manufacturer in play, that makes us 2 food, 2 clues, and 2 treasure tokens. That is incredibly powerful when we're talking about all the random little cards that make treasures, that make food that then make treasures and clues. So we can really pump out a ton of value with Academy Manufacturer. So I do think it's definitely worth the price, even though it is very expensive. Now, on the other hand, if you're looking for some cards to include in the deck that I didn't, mainly for budget purposes, I do have one suggestion for you. And it's weird at this point because typically this is an out of budget card. This is a card that I did not include because I couldn't include it and I couldn't fit it into the budget. In this case, I definitely can fit this card into the budget, but if I'm being perfectly honest, I don't think the deck needs this card in the way that some decks need other cards, but I do think the deck would be better off with it. So in this case, the card we're going to talk about is Clever Concealment. So Clever Concealment is 2 white for an instant. It has Convoke, so we can tap our creatures to help pay for the mana. Any number of target non-land permanents you control phase out. One thing that Bill the Pony is very susceptible to is board wipes. We have Gilrain to protect Bill from board wipes, but we don't have a ton to protect our entire board from board wipes. So Clever Concealment is a great way to protect things, whether it's from a destruction-based board wipe or an exile-based board wipe, or even a mass bounce spell. We can use Clever Concealment to phase all of our stuff out and keep it in play so that we can untap with it next turn. Now, That does refer to tokens. It used to be that phasing couldn't do tokens, but now it can, so that also saves our food tokens. That saves any of our artifacts, any of our equipment, anything like that. So Clever Concealment is really good and definitely does deserve to be in the deck, but I didn't want to include another $7 card just because I could. I wanted to kind of keep it on theme and also keep the deck pretty cheap. But if you are looking to include it in the deck, the card I would recommend taking out is actually Giant Ox, which is 1 and a white for a 0/6 Ox that crews vehicles using its toughness rather than its power. Now, this is, for all intents and purposes, in our deck just a 2-mana 6/6, which is very strong, but it has no natural evasion. There's not a ton of things we can do with it, because if we're suiting up a creature, we really do want to be suiting up Bill, and we don't have any vehicles, so its ability isn't super useful either. There aren't a ton of cards that I would recommend taking out of the deck, if I'm being perfectly honest. I think Giant Ox is still great, and I would love to keep it in. But if something had to get cut for Clever Concealment, it probably should be Giant Ox, because there really isn't anything else that would make the deck worse, or I suppose make the deck better by replacing Clever Concealment. So if you have to take something out, I would recommend Giant Ox, even though, like I said, it's still a perfectly viable card and still very much on theme with what we're trying to do. But anyway, that leads us to the end of our deck tech, and so we do have to get a game in with this deck to see how it plays and how it functions. But before we do that, I do want to take a second to highlight some ways that you can help support the channel if that's something you're interested in. So if you're new to the channel, I make a video like this every single week where we talk about a random card. Obviously, this is our 127th deck. And you can also support us over on Twitter at 13POYNZ, Reddit, u/POYNZ13. Both of those places I also post the video every single week, so if you do happen to miss it on YouTube, you can find it over there. You can also send me an email, dungeonlearnersguide@gmail.com. That is a great way to reach out if you ever have any questions and maybe you're too shy to post them in the comments. I completely get it. It happens. So no judgments there. But those are great ways to reach out to us. If, on the other hand, though, you're looking to support the channel, you can always just like the video and subscribe to the channel. That does help out quite a bit as we are slowly climbing our way up to 800. So thank you all for all of your support so far. But the most direct way that you can actually help support the channel is Patreon and becoming a channel member here on YouTube. Both of those places have 3 different levels that you can join at, and each of them gives you the exact same things that you get as a reward. So for example, you could get access to a Discord channel where we brew up some of the decks for this channel, and also that is the first place I look for players to participate in some of the games. So if you've ever wanted to be in the games on this channel, that is the place to go. You'll also get the guarantee from me that any card you suggest to be turned into a deck for this channel, such as Bill the Pony, which was suggested by Doodle, will be turned into a deck at some point. It might take me a while because I do work pretty far in advance, but I will get to it at some point. Obviously, if you have suggestions, please put them in the comments. Send them to me on Twitter, Reddit, email, anything like that. I try to get to as many as I possibly can, but if I start to run out of time, I do prioritize the patrons over everybody else, so I apologize if yours ever gets cut. But if you'd like to prevent it from getting cut, you can join the Patreon and or be a channel member. Both are acceptable. Other rewards that you may get, you get access to the unedited gameplay videos, so you can hear the players talking, chatting, having a good time. You get access to the deck lists a week early, which is very useful because I've definitely had patrons catch some deck list mistakes in the past, so that is very nice. And then last but not least, you get a random card sent from me to you every single month. It will be one of the random cards that we built around that month. I also select those randomly just to kind of fit the theme. So if you're interested in that, please do check them out, and you can join our amazing patrons and channel members that are listed below, such as William Swiftfoot, Doodle, Calvin Schmidt, Eric Way, Jeff Winger, Jeffrey Boos, Salty and Sunshine, Devin Purser, Tyler Esme, Sven von Nimwegen, and Paddywhack. So to the 10, I believe it's 10 of you, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I think I've done enough of the rambling in terms of the actual ways you can support the channel. So let's check out a game with Bill the Pony. And this week, we are actually kind of going back in time a bit, because this game happened quite a few weeks ago, and it happened on Tim, or Your Dead Next Turn's channel. So if you're interested in checking out the full unedited version of this one, you do not in fact have to be a patron. You can find it over on Tim's YouTube channel. I will make sure to put that in the link to this video below. And he has been doing a series where he makes $50 or less decks. So he knows quite a bit about my channel, so when he was starting this up, he knew that he could probably get me to bring some $50 decks, and it just so happened that right around that time I had finished Build a Pony and was ready to play that one. So I am playing a $33 deck. Tim is playing Legolas Master Archer, which is around $50. Greg is playing Bright Palm Soul Awakener, which I believe the deck list itself is more than $50, but it was a pre-con that he bought for less than $50, so it still counts. But the real highlight here is going to be Shane playing the Watcher in the Water, because that deck is just a $15 deck. So if you are interested in some super cheap deck lists, go check out Tim's channel. He does a lot of great content just like this, and I'm sure I'll be showing up on his channel again in the future. But let's talk a little bit about each of these decks, and then we'll get into the actual gameplay. So starting off with Shane and his Watcher in the Water. Like I said, this is a $15 deck. He really wanted to play, well, the Watcher in the Water. He wanted to be the one who kind of watches the game and sees what goes around. So his deck is full of draw spells, stun effects, so like tapping your opponent's creatures down, and then also, of course, counter spells. This is a mono blue deck to its core, and he really wants to control what's happening in the game, and as he said multiple times while playing this game, he just wants to make sure that his opponents are making good choices. So that is one deck certainly to be aware of. Next up, Tim and his Legolas deck. This deck really focuses on fighting because of the way that Legolas is worded. If he casts a spell that targets Legolas, he puts a counter on him. If he targets a spell that targets another creature, then Legolas gets to deal damage to another creature. So if he casts a fight spell, he's targeting both Legolas and another creature on the board, meaning he gets both of those effects in one. And that can be very useful for what he's trying to do if he's trying to ping things down, if he can give Legolas things like Death Touch and Lifelink, and make sure that no matter what he's doing, his commander is growing bigger and bigger and bigger, and then knocking out anything that could grow big enough to stop it. And then finally, we have Greg playing Bright Palm, and this one is 100% the pre-con deck, so if you are interested in Greg's deck at all, you can of course go purchase this deck for yourself in its entirety, but it is a backup style deck, which focuses very heavily on +1/+1 counters, because Bright Palm itself can double +1/+1 counters. There's a lot of other creatures in the deck that care about giving +1/+1 counters to other creatures, or doubling up counters, or increasing counters. So it really is a +1/+1 counter to its core, and it's definitely a very sweet deck. This was my first chance getting to play against this precon without it being edited, so I thought it was very cool. Definitely one of the better precons I've seen in a long time. So if you haven't already seen this game, like I said, it happened a few weeks ago at this point. If you haven't already seen this game, hit me with some of your predictions. Let me know which deck you think is going to come out on top. Tell me which of these decks you think are pretty sweet. And like I said, if you're looking for any deck lists, go check out Tim's channel. It is linked in the description below. But I suppose without any more talking from me, let's get into this game and see just how well we can do with Build a Pony, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Shane goes first, followed by Tim, Greg, and then myself. On Shane's first turn, he plays an island. Tim plays a forest. Greg plays a Mosswort Bridge, hiding away a card. I play a Plains and then cast Slagworm Armor. Shane plays an island. Tim plays a Rogue's Passage, then casts Thorn-Wheeled Archer. Greg plays an Evolving Wilds, sacrificing it to search his library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. I play a Drifting Meadow. Shane plays an island. Tim plays a forest, then casts his commander Legolas, Master Archer, putting a +1/+1 counter on him whenever Tim targets him with a spell, and letting him do damage equal to his power to another creature whenever Tim targets a creature he doesn't control with a spell. He then moves to combat and attacks Greg for 2. Greg plays a Fury Calm Snarl, revealing a Plains so that it comes into play untapped, then casts Mana Gorger Hydra, which gets a +1/+1 counter whenever a player casts a spell. In response though, Shane casts Urza's Rebuff, countering Greg's Hydra. I cast a Loyal Warhound, searching my library for a Plains, putting it into play tapped since an opponent controls more lands than I do. Then I play another Plains and pass. Shane plays an island. Tim casts Canopy Cover, enchanting Legolas, putting a +1/+1 counter on him and giving him hexproof. In response though, Shane casts Pongify, destroying Legolas and giving Tim a 3/3 ape token, but Tim is determined to save his commander, casting Tamiyo's Safekeeping, giving Legolas hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn, also putting a +1/+1 counter on him and gaining 2 life. Then the canopy finally resolves, and Tim attacks Shane for 3 with Legolas. Greg plays a Temple of Abandon, scrying 1. I play a Plains and attack Tim for 3 with the Warhound. Then, in my second main phase, I cast Key to the City, letting me tap it and discard a card to make target creature unblockable, and also pay 2 when it untaps to draw a card. After that, I cast Gilrain Dunedain Protector, letting me pay 2 and tap her to exile a creature I control, either returning it to play immediately, or at the end of turn with a Vigilance and Lifelink counter on it. Shane plays an island and casts his commander, the Watcher in the Water, entering with 9 stun counters, letting him make a 1/1 tentacle token whenever he draws a card on an opponent's turn, and also untapping a Kraken and putting a stun counter on another creature whenever a tentacle he controls dies. Tim plays a forest and casts Abzan Beastmaster, letting him draw a card in his upkeep if he controls the creature with the greatest toughness. He then moves to combat and attacks Shane for 3 with Legolas. Greg plays a Plains and casts Good Fortune Unicorn, letting him put a +1/+1 counter on his other creatures when they enter the battlefield. I play a Plains and cast my commander, Bill the Pony, making 2 food tokens when he enters the battlefield. I then move to combat and attack Tim for 3 with the Warhound. Shane plays an island. Tim casts Poison the Blade, giving Legolas Death Touch until the end of turn, putting a +1/+1 counter on him and drawing a card. He then plays a forest and also casts Smell Fear, proliferating and having Legolas fight Greg's unicorn, killing it. This also puts a +1/+1 counter on Legolas and lets him do damage equal to his power to the Warhound, killing it as well. Before Tim moves to combat though, Shane casts Trap the Trespassers, letting each player secretly vote for a creature they don't control, tapping and putting a stun counter on those creatures for each vote they receive. This results in Legolas getting 3 stun counters and Gilrain getting 1. Greg plays a Field of Ruin and casts Guardian Scale Lord, putting a +1/+1 counter on itself when it enters, then letting him, when it attacks, to return a non-land permanent from his graveyard to the battlefield with mana value less than or equal to the Scale Lord's power. I equip Bill the Pony with Slagworm Armor, giving him +0/+6 and Vigilance, then cast Flaming Fist, allowing Bill to gain double strike when he attacks. I activate Key to the City, discarding a card to make Bill the Pony unblockable, and this lets me attack Tim with Bill, activating his own ability on attacks, sacrificing a food token, and doing damage equal to his toughness rather than his power, hitting Tim for 20 total commander damage. At the end of turn, Shane casts Thirst for Knowledge, drawing 3 cards, discarding an artifact, and making 3 tentacles. Then on his turn he plays an island. Tim casts Harmonize, drawing 3 cards. Greg plays a Croson Verge, then casts Slurk All Ingesting, which enters with 5 +1/+1 counters and puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature he controls with a +1/+1 counter whenever another creature with a +1/+1 counter on it dies under his control. He then moves to combat, attacking me for 4 with the Scale Lord, returning Good Fortune Unicorn from his graveyard to the battlefield. Then at the end of turn, Shane casts Resculpt, exiling my key to the city, giving me a 4/4 elemental token. When I untap for my turn, Gilrain untaps without any stun counters, then I play a Plains and attack Shane with Bill the Pony, giving him double strike. Shane then blocks with a Tentacle, killing it, removing a stun counter from the Watcher and putting a stun counter on the Scale Lord. Then at the end of turn, Shane casts Learn from the Past, shuffling his graveyard back into his library, drawing a card, and making another Tentacle. On Shane's turn, he plays an island. Then at the end of turn, Tim casts Snakeskin Veil on Legolas, putting 2 +1/+1 counters on him, giving him hexproof until the end of turn. Then in Tim's upkeep, he draws a card since he finally controls the creature with the greatest toughness, plays a forest, and casts Stuffy Doll, naming me when it enters, so whenever it's dealt damage, it does that much damage to me as well. Greg plays a Temple of Triumph, scrying 1, then activates Mosswarp Bridge, casting Champion of Lamholt, entering with a +1/+1 counter, getting a +1/+1 counter whenever another creature enters under Greg's control, and also preventing any of his opponent's creatures with power less than the champion's from blocking any of his creatures. Once that's resolved, he also casts Forgotten Ancient, which gets a +1/+1 counter whenever a player casts a spell. He then attacks me for 5 with Slurk, and before the end of turn, I activate Gilrain, exiling Bill and returning him to play at the end of turn with a Vigilance and Lifelink counter, making 2 more food tokens. Still at the end of turn, I flash in Cast Out, but Shane counters it with Unwind, untapping 3 of his lands. On my turn, I re-equip Bill with the Slagworm armor, giving him +0/+6 and Vigilance. I then attack Greg with Bill, giving him double strike when he attacks. Greg blocks with his Unicorn, and I sacrifice a food token before the damage, so that Bill deals damage equal to his toughness, killing the Unicorn and gaining me 10 life. Then in my second main phase, I cast the Underworld Cookbook, letting me activate it to discard a card and make a food token. Shane plays an island and casts Teresian Mindbreaker, making any player that it attacks mill half their library rounded up. When Tim untaps for his turn, he finally untaps Legolas, but unfortunately it had 3 stun counters on it, so it still shouldn't untap until his next turn, but we missed that at the time. Then he draws a card in his upkeep thanks to the Beastmaster, plays a forest, and casts Blizzard Brawl, having Legolas fight the Teresian Mindbreaker, killing it. This puts a +1/+1 counter on Legolas, and also lets him deal damage equal to his power to the Champion of Lamholt, killing that as well. When the champion dies, it triggers Slurk, letting Greg put a +1/+1 counter on each of his creatures that already have +1/+1 counters on them. Once that's resolved, Tim casts Prize Fight, having Legolas fight Gilrain, killing her and making a treasure token. Then he also puts another counter on Legolas and has him deal damage equal to his power to Greg's Forgotten Ancient, doing 10 damage to its 11 toughness. After that, Tim casts his own Forgotten Ancient and passes. In Greg's upkeep, he moves all 8 +1/+1 counters from Forgotten Ancient onto the Scale Lord, and casts Inscription of Abundance Kicked, so he gets to put 2 +1/+1 counters on Guardian Scale Lord, gain 16 life since he controls a creature with 16 power, and have the Scale Lord fight Stuffy Doll, doing 16 damage to me. Once that's resolved, he also casts Krenko Tin Street Kingpin, which gets a +1/+1 counter when it attacks, then creates a number of 1/1 Goblin tokens equal to its power. He moves to combat, attacking Shane for 16 with the Scale Lord and Tim for 6 with Slurk. Shane takes the 16, but Tim blocks with Stuffy Doll, doing another 6 damage to me. Greg also returns Mana Gorger Hydra from his graveyard to the battlefield when he attacks with the Guardian Scale Lord. On my turn, I move straight to combat, attacking Greg with Bill, giving him double strike on attacks. Greg blocks with Krenko, and I sacrifice a food to let Bill do damage equal to his toughness, killing Krenko and gaining me 10 life. Then in my second main phase, I sacrifice the Underworld Cookbook to return Gilrain from my graveyard to my hand, recasting her afterwards. On Shane's turn, he plays an island, then casts Commander Sphere and passes. In Tim's upkeep, he moves the 3 +1/+1 counters on his Forgotten Ancient onto Legolas, plays a forest, and casts Hunter's Insight targeting Legolas, putting a +1/+1 counter on him, letting him draw cards equal to the combat damage he does to an opponent this turn. He then activates Rogue's Passage, making Legolas unblockable this turn, and this allows him to attack Greg for 15 commander damage with Legolas, drawing 15 cards. In Greg's upkeep, he moves the 5 counters on Forgotten Ancient onto his Guardian Scalelord and casts his commander Brightpalm Soul Awakener. In response, Shane sacrifices Commander Sphere to draw a card, making a Tentacle token, then Brightpalm resolves, putting a +1/+1 counter on Guardian Scalelord, and, until the end of turn, giving it the ability to double the counters on a creature when it attacks. Before Greg can move to combat though, Shane casts Hithlane Knots, tapping the Guardian Scalelord, scrying 1, drawing a card, and making a Tentacle token. Then in his second main phase, Greg activates Field of Ruin, sacrificing it to destroy Tim's Rogue's Passage, letting each player search their libraries for a basic land, putting it into play. On my turn, I attack Shane with Bill, giving him double strike, and Shane blocks with a Tentacle, killing it, gaining me a life, and putting a stun counter on the Scalelord. Second main phase, I cast Akroma's Vengeance, destroying all creatures, artifacts, and enchantments, and I also use Gilrain to exile Bill, but unfortunately Tim responds, casting Master's Rebuke, targeting Legolas to put a +1/+1 counter on him, doing damage equal to his power to build a pony, killing my commander, and also to Stuffy Doll, doing 16 damage to me. Then Akroma's Vengeance resolves, wiping the board, and Shane puts 4 stun counters on the Stuffy Doll. On Shane's turn, he recasts his commander, the Watcher in the Water, entering with 9 stun counters. Tim recasts his commander, Legolas, and also cast Rune of Might, enchanting Legolas, putting a +1/+1 counter on him, drawing a card, and also giving him +1/+1 in Trample. Greg casts Commander Sphere, immediately sacrificing it to draw a card, then plays a Kessig Wolf Run, and casts Shalai and Halar, doing a damage to target opponent whenever a +1/+1 counter is put on any of his creatures. On my turn, I cast Tenuous Truce, enchanting Greg, so at his end step, he and I both draw a card, but whenever one of us attacks the other, we sacrifice Tenuous Truce. I also cast Witch's Oven, letting me sacrifice a creature to make a food token, or 2 food tokens if the sacrificed creature had 4 or more toughness. Shane casts Monstrosity of the Lake, paying 5 mana when it enters to tap all creatures his opponents control and put a stun counter on them. Tim casts a Basilisk Collar, equipping it to Legolas, giving him Death Touch and Lifelink. After that, he casts Colossal Majesty, drawing a card in his upkeep if he controls a creature with power 4 or greater. Greg casts a Fertilid, entering with 2 +1/+1 counters, and allowing him to remove a counter to search his library for a basic land, putting it into play. This also triggers Shalai and Halar, doing 2 damage to Tim. He then recasts his commander Brightpaws, putting a +1/+1 counter on itself when it enters, doing 1 more damage to Tim. Then at the end of his turn, he and I both draw a card. On my turn, I simply recast my commander, Bill the Pony, making 2 food tokens when he enters. Shane casts Devastation Tide, returning all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. In response, I sacrifice a food token to gain 3 life, then everything else returns to our hands. After that, he recasts his commander, the Watcher, and passes. Tim plays a forest and recasts his commander Legolas, then recasts Stuffy Doll, this time naming Shane when it enters. He also recast Rune of Might on Legolas, putting a +1/+1 counter on him, drawing a card, and giving him +1/+1 in Trample. Greg plays a Fortified Village tapped, and recasts Shalai and Halar, as well as Brightpalm, once again putting a counter on Shalai and Halar, doing 1 damage to Shane. On my turn, I also recast my commander, Bill the Pony, making 2 food tokens when he enters, and recast Tenuous Truce, this time enchanting Tim. Finally, I cast Cathar's Shield, and pass. Shane recast Monstrosity of the Lake, paying 5 mana, tapping each creature his opponents control and putting a stun counter on them. Tim recast Basilisk Collar, once again equipping it to Legolas to give him Death Touch and Lifelink. Then, at the end of his turn, Tim and I both draw a card. Greg cast Juniper Order Ranger, so now whenever another creature enters under his control, he puts a +1/+1 counter on the creature that enters and on the Ranger. After that, he recast Fertilid, entering with 3 +1/+1 counters this time, while the Ranger also gets 1, letting Greg do 4 total damage to Shane. On my turn, I cast Elend Umbra on Bill, giving him +0/+4 and Totem Armor. I also equip Bill with the Cathar Shield, giving him +0/+3 and Vigilance. On Shane's turn, he simply attacks Tim for 4 with his Monstrosity, and passes. Tim plays a Forest and casts Prey Upon, having Legolas fight Fertilid, killing it and gaining Tim 4 life, while also putting a +1/+1 counter on Legolas and doing damage equal to his power to the Monstrosity. Before that ability resolves though, Shane casts Filter Out, returning all non-creature non-land permanents to their owner's hands, allowing his Kraken to survive the hit from Legolas. Unfortunately for Shane, Tim still has a response, casting Ancient Animus, putting 2 +1/+1 counters on Legolas, having him fight his own Stuffy Doll to do 6 damage to Shane, and do damage equal to his power to the Monstrosity of the Lake, killing it. Shane still has a way to save himself though, casting Geistwave to return Stuffy Doll to Tim's hand. Tim, determined to do some damage, has yet another response, casting Bite Down to put a counter on Legolas and have him deal 7 damage to Stuffy Doll and the Juniper Order Ranger, killing it. This finally ends with Tim gaining a total of 21 life, while Shane takes 7 and all non-creature non-land permanents are returned to their owner's hands. All of this does clear the way though for Tim to attack Shane for exactly 6 with Legolas, knocking him out of the game. Then, in his second main phase, Tim recasts Stuffy Doll, this time naming Greg when it enters, and also recasts Rune of Might on Legolas, putting a +1/+1 counter on him, drawing a card, and giving him +1/+1 in Trample. Greg casts High Sentinels of Arashen, which gets +1/+1 for each other creature he controls with a +1/+1 counter, and lets him pay 4 mana to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. After that, he casts Mirror Style Master, putting a +1/+1 counter on Bright Palm, and, until the end of turn, giving it the ability to make a token copy of each modified creature he controls that's tapped and attacking whenever it attacks. This also does 1 damage to Tim. He then attacks me with Bright Palm for 5, doubling the counters on Shalai and Halar, doing 2 damage to Tim, and attacks Tim for 5 with Shalai and Halar. This also creates a token copy of Shalai and Halar, but due to the legend rule, it dies immediately. On my turn, I play a Plains and cast Angel of the Ruins, exiling Tim's Rune of Might and Stuffy Doll when it enters. This lets me attack Tim for 1 with Bill the Pony, putting him to exactly 21 Bill damage, knocking him out with Commander damage. Greg moves straight to combat, attacking me with his entire board, making copies of Bright Palm and Shalai and Halar, which both die immediately, but he does get to put a counter on Sentinels of Arashen, double the counters on Bright Palm, and do a total of 3 damage to me. I block the Mirror Style Master with my Angel, and before damage, tap it to flashback Prismatic Strands, preventing all damage from white sources this turn. Still before damage, Greg activates Kessig Wolf Run for X = 8, giving the Mirror Style Master +8/+0 and Trample, so I still take a total of 4 damage. On my turn, I play a Plains and cast Zatalpa Primal Dawn. Unfortunately, this isn't enough to stop Greg from attacking me with his entire board on his turn, especially when he can activate Kessig Wolf Run for X = 8 again, knocking me out and winning Greg the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. I'm not going to lie to you, that was a very long game, unedited. It was about 2.5 hours long, and some people might consider that a mark against playing budget decks, but personally I thought it was a ton of fun. It was very interactive. Every player really got to show what their deck was all about. And so those are the games that really made me fall in love with Commander, and is probably a good reason why I'm going to continue making budget decks for a long time. So overall, I thought everyone's deck was phenomenal. I thought everyone did a great job. We're going to go around the table, talk a little bit about each of the decks, how I think they did, and then, of course, let me know in the comments what you thought as well. So starting off with Shane and his Watcher in the Water, I thought it was very impressive what he was able to do with just $15 for a deck, and it really felt like he was almost stepping into the role of the Watcher in the Water. There were a lot of different turns in that game where he just played an island and passed and didn't do anything on his turn, waited to hold up counter magic, waited to hold up interaction, waited to hold up card draw. It was very cool to see, and I'm not going to lie, it has definitely inspired me to make a similar deck of my own, even though I am very much not a blue player, so we'll see how that one goes in the long run. Next up, we have Tim and his Legolas deck, also very impressive. It's kind of surprising how effective a single fight spell is when it's eliminating 2 creatures at the table with every single fight spell. So being able to just cast something as simple as like Prey Upon and then take out 2 threats at the table really meant that Legolas spent a lot of that game kind of unopposed. There wasn't too much that most of us could do, and unless we had creatures like the Forgotten Ancient or Build a Pony that had massive toughness, nothing was really surviving Legolas's wrath. So, very, very cool showing from Legolas. Next up, our winner, Greg. Very cool to see the pre-constructed deck come out with a win. I don't think that happens too often, so it was very neat to be a part of it. And it was very impressive. Right out of the box, that deck did quite a bit. There were a lot of really cool synergies. Shalai and Halar especially is very impressive, being able to just kind of dish out damage based on counters, and then since you're putting counters on stuff, your stuff is getting bigger, you're still just able to do more damage. So very, very cool. If that's a deck that interests you, do pick it up. Seems very sweet. I wouldn't mind getting to play Bright Palm myself when I get a chance. And then of course our deck. Very, very happy with Build a Pony. This is legitimately the deck, or not even the deck. This is the game that made me want to keep the deck around. So when I was able to hit Tim for 20 command damage out of nowhere with Build a Pony, that was the moment when I was like, yep, this deck is staying together. I'm going to keep it, and I'm just going to keep doing that to people. And I really was very impressed with how quickly Bill became a threat, how difficult Bill was to get rid of, how resilient he was, and just being able to use Gilrain multiple times to bring him back and exile him and bring him back again with counters. It was very, very cool and very, very fun. And obviously a little bit of a brag on my own right, but this is, out of all the games I've played with Build a Pony so far, this is the only game that Build a Pony has lost. Every other game that I've played with this deck, I've actually won the game. I'm not 100% sure how. Sometimes I just kind of stumble into victories with Bill, but it is a very effective deck, and so I think that for $33, we really put together an amazing, well-rounded deck that can do everything it wants to do. So if this is something you're interested in, I do highly recommend picking up the deck, trying it out. Like I said, it's only $33, so you really can't go wrong. But I think that is it for this week. So if you've enjoyed the video, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel. That does help out quite a bit. And I suppose with all of that being said, I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.